Hello, my name is Chris Douglas. Welcome to part 2 of my SharePoint Saturday presentation, AngularJS and SharePoint. Now we're going to talk about our single page application, what our application will do, and what do we need to do to accomplish that. This application we're building today is going to read from a SharePoint list. It's going to show different views of that list. It's going to allow you to search for keywords. It's going to read a selected SharePoint item, and you're going to be able to add or edit a SharePoint item to the list. What do we need to do for this to work? First, we need to download JavaScript libraries. If you're familiar with CDNs, you can point to the CDN for jQuery and Angular and have your website automatically retrieve those libraries from the CDN at view time. What I prefer to do is to get a copy of those libraries and store them locally, either in the Site Assets folder, like we're doing today, or in the 15 Hive for your SharePoint server, so that everyone using AngularJS and jQuery is pointing to the same version located in the same place. We're also going to need to create a SharePoint list. Now, in my example, and I'm sure if you try this at home, you probably already have a SharePoint list that you want to apply this to. If not, create a SharePoint list from scratch and add 4 or 5 fields and populate some data. But I find it's easier when you're testing to take a list that you already have that already has data, so you can see what your work looks like as you progress. When we're done today, the code you'll be able to download, you'll be able to apply this to any SharePoint list you have, and you can apply this to as many SharePoint lists as you like. We're going to need to create a site page, which is going to host our application and have all of the SharePoint goodness displayed on the page around our app. Certainly, you could build AngularJS apps to run as web parts to run on a page with several other web parts. It would be neat if you're building a dashboard and you want to make an AngularJS app for every list representing your dashboard, and then in real time they can be refreshed. You can do that. But to keep our example simple today, we're going to take one app for one list and display it on one page just so everyone can follow along. But I definitely encourage you to experiment and see what else you can do. We're also going to need to create HTML, CSS, and JS files. I realize there's only one bullet, but that's actually the bulk of what we'll be doing today. The actual AngularJS app is these files that we're going to be putting in the Site Assets library. So that's what we need to do. Let's go ahead and go now to the website. We're now going to go to my website, www.douglasweb.com. It's listed on the PowerPoint slide. And we're going to use one of the lists I already created called Cigars. Now, when you are looking at videos online, as I did when I was looking at AngularJS, I found most of the time when they're doing introductory videos, they would do all of the coding right there in front of you, and you get to watch the instructor type all of the code for you to look as he types, and then you see the results. Since this is more of an advanced sort of overview of this concept, I'm not going to be doing that. I've already got pre-made files that I'm showing you, and I'll show you the finished product before we get started, because it's just too much to type, and I can't possibly do it in an hour, and I had to have this ready for SharePoint Saturday. It had to be a package deal. I definitely encourage you, though, to go out if you want to learn more about AngularJS. There are plenty of videos on YouTube and elsewhere to show you the ins and outs of Angular. But what I hope to accomplish with this presentation is just to show you what I managed to learn from several months of digging around the web and figuring out how to make Angular talk to SharePoint. That's the important thing to get across here, is how can we use Angular to talk to SharePoint? Once you understand how that works, you can go back and fill in the details yourself. There's more capabilities in AngularJS that I haven't begun to touch on, and there's certainly more functionality you can add, but this is just meant to show you, to connect the dots that I had to connect on my own, is how can we make one of these simplest hello world kind of things work, and then you can definitely pursue more on your own. Here is our website, www.douglasweb.com. Inside of that, we're going to be creating a SharePoint list. We're going to be looking at the files inside assets. We're going to be creating a site page. As you see on the right, that's going to be cigardemo.aspx. Inside of that, we're going to insert a content editor web part that is going to point to cigars.html. Then inside of that is a div tag that indicates the AngularJS application, a single page application, and the routing software will then display list, display, or edit inside of Cigars. So as you can see, we have 3 different levels where we can display our HTML, each inside of the other. Here is my SharePoint list, Cigars. As you can see, it's a very straightforward list. It contains cigars that I have bought in the past and made my own rating system so I can keep track, and when I go to buy a new cigar, I can look and see if I bought one before, if I liked it or didn't like it. So it has a selection of fields. They're all basically string or number fields, very straightforward. We have one calculated column, stars, which is based on the rating column, but you can see it's a very straightforward list. I would recommend you find a list you already have to use for your example, something that has at least 10 or 20 entries or more, and which has at least 5 or 6 columns. Otherwise, you won't have a lot of meat to dig into when you're building your form. So this is a basic view of the list. And here we see the display page for one cigar in my list. You see most of the fields listed. You'll note the stars calculated column, which simply is a div displaying the big star icon. So typical for SharePoint, you see most of the fields listed here. Next, I'll show you the edit screen. And here, of course, is the edit screen. You see most of the fields. You see a drop down for shape. In my example, I'm treating everything as text. In future videos, I'll explain how to do choice and lookup fields and how to show those sort of controls. So I'm showing you all these basically to give you an idea of what a regular SharePoint list looks like. Most of you, of course, should be familiar with it. But the whole idea is once you have more than 5 or 6 fields in your list, then the edit form becomes unwieldy, and which is why we're going with a custom edit and display form for our SharePoint list. And that's all for part 2 of this series. I have to keep these kind of short because I don't know how many minutes YouTube will let me have. So I'm trying to keep them all under 10 minutes. In our next part of the series, we will get into the site assets library, and I'll show you the actual AngularJS files that we're going to use to build our SharePoint application. Stay tuned.